let's chat. So today, we'll obviously be talking about domestic violence, but with a different take. So before I get started, I want to shout out this t-shirt company, Theratees. I collaborated with them and they sent me this very cute shirt that I absolutely love. I have a savior and a therapist. They are out here trying to further destigmatize mental health. And one of my main goals for Black people is to help everybody understand that your faith and therapy can coexist. You don't have to choose one or the other. They can complement one another when you really do it right. So check them out on Instagram. I'll have their name at the bottom at Thera_tees, and shop with them because they're Black owned. And again, like, they have other cute little shirts just like this one. So to move on to what we're going to talk about today. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This time last year, I did a little snippet on my Instagram story, which does nobody any good. So here we are again, a year later, getting ready to film and put this on the channel. One of the main things that I think is important about when talking about domestic violence are the precepts that get us there. Because when somebody ends up in a domestic violence situation, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like they just woke up one day and their partner started hitting on them and they decided not to leave. Like, it's a lot more layers to the situation usually. And one thing I want women or young girls or people in general, because men can be victims as well. Let me start there and not make this gender biased. But that everybody knows that there are things that lead up and there are ways that we can intervene early. So that way, by the time the physical stuff starts, they done already got their hooks in you mentally and emotionally. So I want to talk about the signs of control, power, manipulation that start at the very beginning of an abusive relationship before the hitting actually starts. Because we already know, that physical abuse it happens. It can be very tragic. This is how people end up dead. And so I want us to talk about how do we be proactive in assessing our relationships beforehand, so that way as these little markers and red flags and things of that nature start to come out, we can see them, we can take heed, and we can get the fuck. Okay? Sorry, y'all. I'm still a little sinusy. What I typically see happens is when it comes to words like abuse, right? I feel like when people say them or see them, they are embodied of like this big, black, ugly word. This word that you're only supposed to use in the most severe situations. Same thing with like rape and assault, right? Like we can consider something a rape or an assault, but it may not be like kidnapped in the alley, thrown down. It may be, I have a little too much to drink. This guy that I'm familiar with, he pressured me into sex, or I didn't want to do it, and then we ended up doing it. But that's also assault. That's also rape. But because it doesn't look like getting knocked down in the alley and attacked by a stranger, we are hesitant to call it that. And the same thing happens with abuse, right? So there can be emotional abuse, financial abuse, mental abuse, these other types of abuse that are happening, or these other types of behaviors that are manipulative, that are controlling, that happen, that still should be considered abusive, but people are less likely to call them that because, again, abuse, we only want to talk about physical abuse, but there are other spectrums on this wheel that are abuse. So we just need to get comfortable with calling a spade instead of trying to tiptoe around it. Let's be clear that abuse is any attempt to gain control or power over another person using physical, emotional, sexual, or financial tactics. So there doesn't have to be somebody getting hit for it to be abuse. So let's start there. One of the references that I'll be using for this chat, I used to use this in group when I was working for somebody. Y'all know I don't do that no more. But when I used to be working a regular job, my old 9 to 5, I got this really great worksheet that I would use in group. And the thing that I like about it is, as you see on the outside of the wheel, it says physical violence. And then they have power and control in the middle. So pretty much they're listing all these different behaviors that can eventually lead to physical violence. So again, this is like a stepping stone. If you see these things happening, these are things that can lead to domestic violence, that can lead to physical abuse. And so that's what I really want to make sure that we talk about today. The more subtle signs, the things that sometimes we make excuses for, we think that people can, that we can change it or that we can fix it. And so I think it's just really important to talk about these less discussed forms. So that way, again, we're creating the space for people to be like, oh, that happened to me. I didn't even realize that was abusive. I didn't even realize that, that could be traumatic, or I didn't realize that could have really carried on into other things. So I'll be referencing this wheel. Of course, I got my own little notes in place to make sure I give y'all all the info necessary. I don't miss no beats. Okay, so let's start with one of the more common forms, which is emotional and verbal abuse. Also could be referred to, as mental abuse. So what this looks like is constant criticism, name calling, like under no circumstances. I know that some couples, especially nowadays, get off calling each other the B words and things like that. And I think there's a difference of something being said in a joking manner, or I'm not even going to necessarily say out of love, because an abuser will be like, oh, I just say that because I love you. Like, no, not that type. But, people joke around. They kiki, you should be able to throw jokes and have fun in your relationship. But once it gets to a point where you feel like you the butt of this person's you the butt of their joke all the time, and you start to feel degraded, embarrassed, humiliated, that's when it's time to be like, okay, let's talk about how we're joking with each other. And if they're not receptive to that, or they try to minimize that, then that should also be a red flag. So it's one thing to know that, like, that's just how we play. It's another thing for somebody on the receiving end to start feeling like they are being attacked. So again, like if there are jokes being thrown around, you've expressed how it makes you feel, they continue to do it, that's a problem. Guilting your partner into doing things that they don't want to do. So phrases like, if you really loved me, you would do X, Y, Z. That, I know that one gets the young girls, and that's what I want people to really understand, that love rarely lives in that statement. If you really love me, it's very much so. My mama used to tell me all the time before I lost my virginity, like, don't believe no boy that'll tell you if you really love him, you'll give him some. Because why? Because we know that can be said to manipulate somebody if they want to prove that they love you so much. It's definitely not a move. Which leads me into gaslighting. So a lot of people throw gaslighting around. For anybody that doesn't know, gaslighting is the act of causing someone to pretty much question what they know to be true by manipulation. So I'll go more into gaslighting later. But the silent treatment, that's another one people don't realize can be abusive to a certain extent, because what happens is if you know that it's the intent behind it. So if I'm doing this as a way to put my partner in a very emotional or vulnerable state, that can be considered abusive. Not just because, like, you need some time to yourself or you can ready to cut somebody off, but because, like, you know that you intend to still be with this person, but you're purposely, causing them a lot of distress by refusing to communicate. Damaging or destroying someone's property. That, in fact, is emotionally abusive, because what happens is that, again, when we buy stuff, yes, you shouldn't be emotionally attached to stuff, to inanimate objects, but you know, you hold value in your possessions. And so when a person goes out of their way to to jack something up, to ruin it, to destroy something that you work hard to get, or something that you find to be extremely valuable to you, that's emotional abuse. So I want people to understand that, like, oh, just because, you know, especially the women, because we see women tending to do this a little bit more often. And I want the women to understand that by the time you get to the point of feeling like you want to destroy your partner's property because you are that upset with them, that just says that they are no longer worthy of your energy and it's time to move on. You know, also, like, they're cracking down on this stuff, like on vandalism, because that's what that is. So don't catch you a case over somebody that you really shouldn't be catching a case over just because you wanted to go jack their stuff up. You don't want that person to have, you don't want somebody to have that type of power over you. Okay, next. So sharing or exploiting things told to you in confidence is definitely emotional abuse. Like, if I sit here and I tell you something that you know to be extremely personal to me, and you use that as a way to embarrass me, or using my secrets against me. Like, I hear that a lot of times. It's like, people don't like to be vulnerable because they are worried that somebody is going to throw it back in their face or use it as a reason to make them seem less than when they are in the heat of an argument. So information shared during vulnerable moments of connection, they should just never be used as a weapon against somebody. Like, there are other ways to get your point across. And when you do stuff like that and you stay with the person, there's just always a level of distrust that exists within the relationship. People need to know that they have a safe space with you when they're dating you, and they can't do that when, or in general with family. Like, family will sit there and throw your business out to make you feel bad. And that's, again, that's a sign of emotional abuse. It's not okay. And then, you know, for the people that date outside their race, this is extremely important. You never want to let your partner get away with the whole idea of, oh, well, I'm not talking about you. But they say degrading or stereotypical things about your culture, or about your ethnicity, about your race. And then they try to exclude you out of it, because let me tell you, you excluded out of it now. But the moment they get really upset, you ain't going to be excluded out of it then. So there's a subconscious bias that still exists, regardless to them trying to separate you from the bunch. But that's something you want to pay attention to. Okay, so the next category is sexual coercion. And what this pretty much looks like is there's a lot of manipulation involved, and there's a lot of crossing of boundaries. So this usually looks like, you know, using guilt trips or threats to, like, get your sexual needs met, or to get somebody into agreement of having sex with you, pressuring them for sex, treating them like a sex object, touching a person when they don't want to be touched. Like, all of this is, it falls in line with abuse, because one of the things that you're doing is you're crossing the boundary of somebody else. Like, we have different types of boundary. Now you're in the area of crossing a physical boundary. This behavior is I see more often with people who are in relationships, or people that are in that are married, because there seems to be this false thought that when you get married to somebody, that consent comes off the table. And consent does not come off the table, regardless if you're married, if you're engaged, if you're in a relationship. I've seen that some people think that, like, once they get married, that they're entitled to their to their partner's sexual space, to their, you know, all of that. And that's the issue with consent. Like, consent still exists. So that's just one example of how I feel like, you know, people can sometimes lose their boundaries when they get in a serious relationship or they get married, because they allow the other person to think that they are entitled to their body. Now, there is a whole market towards bondage and I don't want to say this word wrong, but what is it called? BDSM? The people that get down real kinky with the sex. I should have did my research. I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to pronounce these words. Sadism, masochism. I don't know everything, y'all. I'm telling you. But we know that there is a whole market towards people that are into bondage and rougher sex practices, right? And so I don't want this to be confused with that. But if there is ever a point in which your partner is not honoring your limits, even when you into the kinky stuff, that's a problem. Because essentially you all, like when people do stuff like that, they set sexual limits. So if you ever feel like there is force, even if it's playful, that during sex that's used that makes one of the parties feel uncomfortable, then that's again a form of abusive behavior, because now you're getting into hurting someone physically and not honoring, that's why people who do stuff like that, they have a safe word. And if I say the safe word and you continue to hurt me, now we done cross lines into abuse. Now this should go without saying, sexual harassment, drugging, having sex with somebody when they are incoherent or unable to make a clear decision regarding consent. And then we go into sexual harassment, which looks like making inappropriate or sexual comments about appearance, clothing or body parts, asking sexual questions regarding, maybe somebody's history, or they're making comments about their sexual orientation that are inappropriate, sending suggestive and unwanted text messages or pictures, letters, or emails. So for you all who think it's appropriate to be dropping unsolicited dick pics into women's phones, it's abuse. Stop doing that. It is sexual coercion. It is sexual harassment. Okay? If she didn't ask for it, if y'all not on that level, if y'all not talking about sex, keep that Peter Weeder to yourself. All right? It's not okay. And then, of course, just exhibiting sexual unwanted behaviors. If it's unwanted, then that is where you start to cross the line. All right, so next we have financial abuse. Financial abuse is one of the more subtle kinds of abuse because it kind of has become normalized in certain areas, right? So what happens is like when people, especially women who find themselves in domestic violence situations, there comes a point where the abuser may not want their partner to work because they want to isolate them. So to do that, they will say that you can't work and you are supposed to abide by that. So these types of financial abuse can look like not allowing your partner to work or preventing them from obtaining or maintaining employment, harassing your partner while they're at work, calling multiple times, popping up in an effort to get them fired, or inadvertently you get them fired, trying to financially control them. Baby, I really want everybody to know that you never, ever, ever work. I don't care what that look like, how many hours. You never, ever work and allow somebody to tell you that you're supposed to hand all your money over to them. No, sir. Not gonna happen. Okay? So let's just start there. That this whole idea that the person gets to keep their partner on an allowance, and that's different than having a budget. Even couples who have a whole, like, are rich, are wealthy, and they may joke and say, like, I give her an allowance. It's probably a generous allowance, but where the issue comes up is if it isn't agreed upon. So you don't get to tell me, like, you get all, I give you the money, you get all the money, and you give me $50 a week. Oh no, ma'am. So like I said, this is different that's different than having an agreed upon budget. The right manipulator, he may sit there and make it seem like he's better with money. I'm just better with money because I'm a man. So you should let me handle all of that. Let me handle the money. Okay, so another one. Now this is more so for women. It's financial abuse when you use somebody for their money that you don't want. Now that's different from accepting things that are given to you, even though morally we could discuss that from somebody that you don't necessarily like. But when you go into something with the intention of trying to use somebody for their money, that's financial abuse. Sorry, I've been drinking a lot of water. As well as being on the other end of that, expecting sex or sexual acts because you've spent some money. That is financial abuse. This is different than consensual sex work or consensual agreements where it's like, we know we're going into this doing, that's grown folk business, and that is fine because it's consensual. But once you get to a point where the other party doesn't know what's going on, they don't know that this is your plan, they don't know that this is your intent or your motivation, it's abuse. All right, so the next category is sexism. And usually the first red flag that can indicate that there may be sexism in a relationship is when, one of the parties starts talking favorably about stereotypes that demean or degrade a person based on their gender. So, if a man was to say like, women, they places in the kitchen, that would be an example of how sexism, again, these are just behaviors that can lead towards some pretty ugly people, who may not have very good or progressive views on life. So if a man feels like it is his sole responsibility to define the roles in the relationship, without respect for what his partner wants, this usually comes up in very extremely controlling behavior. This can also look like the man being the one who gets to make all of the important decisions without consulting his partner. So again, like sexism usually looks like the man getting to decide or do whatever he wants to do simply because he's a man. Another red flag is rules in the relationship that do not exist for both partners. So if you as a man, you could go out and you can hang out with your friends till 4 a.m., 5 a.m. and I'm not supposed to say anything. But the moment I want to go hang out with my friends, I have a curfew. Sexism, okay? An indicator that you have sexist beliefs, especially like I said, if they start to become controlling about it. It's one thing to say, I don't like you coming home that late because I'm worried about you being out, it's dangerous, blah, blah, blah. Then saying like, your ass got a curfew. How you gonna tell another grown person that they got a curfew? Right. So the next category is using children, which we see very often. This is one of the more popular forms of control and power that people discuss in life, online. The first thing I want to talk about is this idea of being trapped. So, it's one thing for somebody, for a guy to be like, yeah, she trapped me, right? Knowing damn well that he never used a condom or he was not proactive in making sure that she was on birth control. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about genuinely being trapped. And that's the thing. Men and women can both be trapped. Like, men aren't the only people that can be trapped. Again, there is some accountability there. But what makes trapping abusive is because you are doing it as a power play. So for women, it may be, regardless, both people are, whether it's a guy doing it or a girl doing it, what it comes down to is this idea that I want you to be stuck with me. Pressuring somebody, partner, not to have a baby with you is just never okay. And it starts to impinge on the physical boundaries of the other person. It's one thing if we are both supposed to be in agreement that we don't want to have kids, we're practicing safe sex, whatever that looks like for you all, and a person goes out of their way to make sure that either they're impregnating you or you're getting pregnant, that is never all right. So that's just one form of how people use children. Another one is of course, we see this all the time, keeping the child away from the other parent as a power play, with the intent to, it's a difference between having legitimate reasons for your child's safety because the other parent isn't stepping up, whatever. But we're talking about for petty, illegitimate reasons that a person is misusing their power as the predominant parent to keep the child from the other parent. And this may also look like, talking down or talking bad to the child about the other parent, threatening to report the other parent to like child services, with no real grounds or merit. Like, of course, these things can happen and they can be valid, but I'm talking about when there is clearly no substantial evidence or behavior that makes that parent an unfit child other than, they upset that they don't want to be with them no more. All the petty reasons that we know that people end up using children to get their way, using them like a chess piece. Children, they are the ones who suffer when grown-ass adults act like that. So we want to not, and then tarnishing the relationship that could exist with that child and that other parent simply because you are bitter. All right, so the next category is denying, minimizing, blaming. These are just all very frequent behaviors that you see when somebody is etching their way into abuse, or actually when there's a solid relationship already happening and the abuse is starting to rear its ugly head. So if somebody starts to abuse you, they may deny, minimize, blame for the abuse. So, or the victim may do it for them. And what that can look like is, you shouldn't have made me mad. Oh, he's just stressed out because of work. Oh, he had a tough childhood. Like, we trying to make all these justifications for why somebody is being abusive, physically abusive, emotionally abusive, whatever you call it. And what, I want victims to realize is that, like, when we say things like that and we take the accountability off of the abuser and place it onto the victim or other external factors, like, we continue to reinforce this idea that it's okay. And we allow the abuser to become more comfortable exerting that behavior versus like being checked and being told that it's not okay. Again, back to gaslighting. The abuser can gaslight the victim into believing that the circumstances aren't that bad. It could be worse, or you're not gonna find nobody that love you like I do, stuff like that. And then, we start to kind of see the cycle unfold. So it usually happens the first time or the first few times, and then the abuser is very apologetic. They try to, blame their anger or their behavior on just, I'm impulsive, or my favorite, I'm fighting, I'm fighting demons. If a man tell you he fighting demons, run, okay? But really, all of those are they're just cop-outs to try to, divert the attention from what they're doing to the fact that, they're hurting this too. It hurts me to do this to you. And that's why I think that as a community, like, Black people have to get away from whooping their kids and still trying to, like, enforce, like, I love you, or I hit you because I love you, because then those kids grow up to believe that violence and love go together. You get what I'm saying? I think somebody put it in a very good way for me the other day, which was that if I don't allow a man to hit me, why would I allow my daughter's father to hit her? Like, why would I demonstrate that men should hit women in whatever form, So that's another chat for another day, but that's just one way to think about it, is that behavior becomes learned from the people that are the little people that may be around you. So it's through denying, minimizing, and allowing the blame or the blame happening that, we give the abuse a space to grow. Because this just, doing those things just reinforces what happens. And what I want people to acknowledge is the fact that usually on average, women in abusive relationships or domestic violence situations try to leave up to 7 times before they are successful. And usually it's because they start to carry the weight of believing that what's happening to them is their fault, that they deserve it, in a place of hopelessness of what they can or should do, you know. So I want people to, before you become quick to judge somebody in that situation, like, well, why she don't just leave, you know. Once that cycle begins, it's so hard for you to break out of it, because now you're being mentally and emotionally entrapped in the attachment or the love or the bond that you feel like you already have with this person. So it's not as easy as just getting up and leaving. And you can be the most, you know, you could have been the most independent, self-assured, you know, boss ass woman. But like, if the right manipulator can get you attached and they can start that cycle of abuse, you start to turn to somebody you don't even recognize because it's that strong. So the next category is isolation, gaslighting, and extreme jealousy. So usually once a victim has a deep attachment to the abuser, the gaslighting becomes easier to do. And again, like, what that looks like is causing a person to question their own sanity and what they believe to be true. So if I'm walking in the street with my friend, and I clearly see my man at a restaurant kissing on another girl, and then he get home and I confront him about that, and he sit there and tries to convince me that I didn't see what I saw, what I know I saw, that's gaslighting. Okay? So that is the best example I could give you, is for you to know and see that something is clearly happening, and for that person to come and try and convince you, no, that ain't happening. I don't know what you saw. Are you sure? You need to get your ass checked? Like, did you have your glasses on? Because you know when you don't have your glasses on, you can't see. And no, you ain't see me kiss her. That's my cousin. We was just sharing a secret. See how silly that sounds? But when you in love and you really want to believe that a person not going to do you like that, you'll sit there and let them tell you anything. So that's just a light example of what gaslighting looks like. Another isolation. So this is one of the most important things that abusers do, because by isolating you, they can get you away from the people that care the most about you, and they can start to really reinforce that they are the only ones that care about you. I always tell people, if you've been friends with Christina for the last 15 years and then your new man come into your life trying to tell you that Christina is a hoe and you don't need to be hanging out with her, that's a problem, because it don't just end with Christina. They're going to find a way to tell you something about your mama, how she plotting on you, your daddy, your cousins, everybody who's been in your life, supporting you, loving you, showing up for you. An abuser will sit there and have you believing that they are behind your back in cahoots, going after you, and that he the only person you can depend on. So, if, like I said, that's just a red flag. Is don't start to be so in love and so engulfed that you start to miss the fact that this person is purposely moving you away from the people that care about you, because it's usually them that see right through it, especially the best friends. The best friends be like, girl, yeah, something's off. And the abusers, they know that. So they work overtime to get you to believe that these people that's in your life are not good for you. So yeah, any efforts to isolate and create distance between, your family and your friends is done with the intent to manipulate you, to be able to manipulate you without the influence of other people. Like, an abuser can't do his job if it's somebody always in his business. So he got to remove everybody so he could do what he want to do. And I'm saying he lightly, because like I said, abuse can come in any gender, any form. And so back to what I was saying, abusers, their main goal is to strip their victim of any identity. So that can even look like convincing their partner to abandon things that they enjoy. You know, you've been dancing or skating or whatever for your whole life. It's your hobby, and then all of a sudden somebody come into your life and y'all get to dating and they try to convince you that you don't need to be doing it. So all the things that you used to find enjoyment in, working, you know, things like that, it's an attempt to isolate you, to strip you of your identity, so that way you do whatever they tell you to do. If they want you to like cooking, you're going to like cooking. If they want you to like gardening, you're going to like gardening. Okay, now we on jealousy. So, the thing is sometimes we normalize jealousy to be like this cute thing, like, oh, he just loves me so much. Everybody, jealousy is a normal emotion. Let me start there. There's nothing wrong with feeling jealous. It is when that jealousy starts to get projected that it becomes an issue. When it goes unaddressed and you're not really wondering what's motivating the jealousy. So, or using the jealousy to justify your controlling and abusive behaviors for the purpose of this context. So if, you know, you can't never get a moment alone because they always want you to check in. They always want to know who you with, where you at, what you doing. Problem. Because even in a relationship, even in a marriage, you still are entitled to some form of privacy. A person doesn't just get everything. Like, we are still individuals with our own boundaries and, you know, our own things that we want to keep to ourselves. So, going through your phone, going through your messages, clearly is an indication that they have an issue with control and some codependency, because that's something that we can see with people who are codependent as well, is like always needing to have some form of connection to the partner, and not being able to trust and believe that, you know, they off doing their own thing and they're okay. Going through phones, messages, I just said that, but I'm gonna say it again. Doing this behind your partner's back, or through demanding that they be in agreement with this invasion of privacy. Because that's something else I see, is like the person don't really want to do it, but it's like, you need to do it. A quick example I want to give of how jealousy can be used to justify controlling behavior is by trying to say, like, okay, the best way I can explain this is through an example. So, long story short, my brother was dating this girl. They were together for a long time. In teenage years. I mean, they were together for like 3 years. They found out he cheated. I said they. She found out he cheated. She decided to still be with him. She would, every time she would see him interacting with a woman on social media, it was a problem. She wanted him to, at will, block everybody that she wanted to be blocked. Now, was he wrong for cheating? Absolutely. But you don't get back with somebody and then allow your jealousy to control how you interact with them. Like, you don't get a one-up. You don't get to constantly invade my privacy because you decided to get back with me after I cheated. That is where the trust has to be rebuilt. It's one thing for me to volunteer certain things because I want you to trust me. It's another thing for you to demand and think that I'm not supposed to talk to the opposite sex ever because you're jealous and you're upset because of what happened. So I hope that made sense. That's just what I mean, as far as like, you cannot use jealousy as an excuse to justify controlling behavior. And another way that jealousy shows up is if every time you have a great accomplishment, you know, something you're proud of, and that person wants to sit there and throw shade or minimize. Damn, my mama here. I'll come back to this stuff. Okay, as I was saying, so if you starting to glow up, maybe you outgrowing them, maybe you surpassing them in life accomplishments, and they don't show up for you, they don't support you, they always have an issue, you know, with you being the center of attention, that's a red flag. Because you don't want no hater in your relationship. You don't want nobody next to you that's secretly hoping that you fail or plotting on your downfall. Because then what that turns into is to sabotaging your shit. Sabotaging your progress and you being able to do other stuff because they're mad. They're jealous. All right? So Usually what ends up happening is they scare you. You on a fast track. You're going to leave them behind. And that just might mean they need to step up or get left. So again, we're just talking about behavior. Some of these things on their own might not be that bad, but when you start seeing a bunch of them together, that is when you need to run. And the last category is intimidation and threats. So this is just the more outright aggressive behavior that tells you that a person is in an unhealthy and abusive situation. So I've seen, I've had clients who looked past abusive tendencies or behaviors because they hadn't hit them. So, they punching walls, they throwing stuff, and because they haven't hit you being like, it's, maybe it's okay, or they just got mad, it's not you today. But it's going to be you eventually, because regardless, if somebody gets to throwing stuff and punching stuff when they get mad, there's usually, that's an indication of some emotional dysregulation. And for anybody that doesn't know what that means, I use that word, that phrase a lot. It's somebody who cannot regulate their moods, their ups and downs. They cannot manage their emotions as they show up. So like I said, smashing properties, all this other stuff in front of your partner, that is an intimidation tactic. Like, you see me doing this to this, you see how mad I can get. It could be you one day. Lashing out, like I said, is an indication that people just don't know how to emotionally regulate. They don't know how to tolerate any the stress that they're feeling. My thing is, and the reason why I tell people not to excuse their behavior is because if you see a child doing that as a response to being mad, throwing stuff, kicking stuff, punching stuff, you would be concerned for that child, right? You would be concerned for their development. You would be worried that something was wrong with them and they needed some help. It's the same thing with adults. You don't do stuff like that and then make an excuse for it, because you wouldn't really do that for no child. You would have genuine concern because you know that, I don't know why it just seems more dramatic when you see a child doing it versus an adult, when they're indicative of the same thing. There's something off with you being able to emotionally regulate. So any actions that can instill or behaviors or gestures that can instill fear in somebody else. So this may look like, we've seen on the movies where the couple go out and the man will sit there and the woman say something he don't like, he'll squeeze her arm or squeeze a leg, in public to kind of reinforce that I'm the one in charge, or I could abuse you, or I could knock all this shit up, stuff like that. Those are your more, again, unless you're in it, you may not notice how this man won't let this girl's thigh go because he's squeezing the life out of it. And the last behavior that I really want to address is threatening suicide, because I've had a lot of clients who feel like they've gotten caught in very abusive situations because the partner has been like, if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. What am I going to do? And I will say that that is never a reason to stay in an abusive situation, because number one, suicide is a personal choice. If somebody does it, there's no responsibility on you because they decided to do that. I've talked about that on here before. Another point to make is that if you are ever concerned about somebody committing suicide, you can call the police and tell them. And again, in today's climate, I know that is not ideal. I know. But if you are genuinely concerned about their well-being, the police will go do a well-being check. And if they find them to actually be suicidal or have some concern, they will take them to a psych hospital. If they don't, then they just sitting there with the dumb face because you just sat there and said you was going to commit suicide. Now the cause of bluff and you're not going to do it. So one thing I know about people who are actually suicidal from working with them is the fact that they don't play about that. you know, and the people who talk about it the most are the ones who are still in a place of maybe having to cry for help. But when a person actually wants to do it, they're going to do it. So regardless, you want to relinquish yourself from any guilt that comes in the event that it does happen. But in most times, they not finna do it. And that's me as a mental health professional telling you. So do not allow that to be how somebody keeps you in place, because you are panicked at the thought of, you know, them potentially doing that. Because like I said, that's not your responsibility. So before I wrap up, I was supposed to, I did a poll with my followers, and I just realized that I didn't do a very good job of having my notes together for today. But I mean, I'm here. I'm giving y'all this info, so it's okay. So in my poll, I asked just pretty much a few general questions to show people how prevalent domestic violence and abuse is in our lives, even though we may not be the person experiencing it, or you might be, but you can be indirectly affected. So I asked my followers, how have you or someone you know ever been in a physically abusive relationship? 59 people said yes, 6 people said no. Have you or someone you know ever been in an emotionally or verbally abusive relationship? 67 people said yes, 3 people said no. Like, these are a good chunk of numbers. Have you or someone else ever been a victim of rape, sexual assault, or stalking by an intimate partner? 39 people said yes, 25 people said no. Have you or someone you know ever stayed with a partner after being abused? 61 people said yes, 5 people said no. Have you or someone else ever been abused in a way by family or close family friends within the home? I'm sorry if I sound like I'm reading very remedial. 32 people said yes and 30 people said no. And the last question was, are you or someone you know a survivor of domestic violence? 55 people said yes, 7 people said no. So that's just a little information for you. An estimated 29.1% of African American females are victimized by intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And that looks like rape, physical assault, or stalking. African American females experience intimate partner violence at a rate 35% higher than that of white females, and about 2.5 times the rate of women of other races. However, they are less likely than white women to use social services, battered women's programs, or go to the hospital because of domestic violence. According to the National Violence Against Women surveys, African American women experience higher rates of intimate partner homicide when compared to their white counterparts. So, one of my last few videos was about protecting Black women. This is why we have to do that, because these are the numbers. These are our numbers. I just read stats that were specific to African American women, and we are the most abused. So we have to do better. So next video, I'll be coming back with my own rendition of probably the closest thing I've been in that would be considered an emotionally abusive relationship. I want to tell that story. I think it's important for people to know and understand that, again, to just demonstrate that there are things that lead up to the physical stuff. All right, so y'all have a good evening.